Welcome back to the Don't Recom channel. We're here with the Infinity Worksheet, how to build a 200-point tournament army. Things to remember. If you got 200 points, it means without modifications, like a lieutenant who gives you more, you have 4 special weapon costs, and these are important to keep in your calculation as you're deciding what you're taking, what you're not taking. What are some nice-to-haves when you're building your list? A doctor, an engineer, camo units. And when I say camo units, this incorporates everything from mimetism all the way up to TO camouflage. Anything that kind of keeps a person from necessarily shooting at you directly or helps to buff up the difficulty it is to hit that unit. Multi-Spectral Visor, so you can get around a lot of this camouflage that exists. You want to hide your lieutenant. If you can, you really want to put your lieutenant and another model that is modeled exactly the same with the same weapon set so that effectively your opponent doesn't know where your lieutenant is. You want to take high damage units. These are units that cause a lot of damage. They're units that carry weapons like heavy machine guns, like sniper rifles, like even Spitfires, or missile launchers. Fantastic weapon. You may want to take a hacker. This is really important if in your list you also have a lot of heavy infantry, with the exception of Ariadna, who cannot be hacked, or if you have a tag, which, again, these are for heavy infantry and for tags. Your opponent can effectively hack these units and either shut them down or potentially convert them to their army. You also might want to bring units that disrupt deployment. What does that mean? It means that you might take a lieutenant with a strategos level that might affect how well your opponent can deploy his forces. You might also want to take units that come in through the side of the board during turn 1 as opposed to what you have deployed on the table at the beginning of the game. And most importantly, you definitely want to make sure you have sufficient regular orders. Across the board, there are some nice-to-haves that might not apply to one army or the next, but things like regular orders, pretty much guaranteed going to be important no matter what army you're taking. Please note that I am actually specifying regular orders as opposed to irregular orders, and that's kind of a very important distinction because with models that have regular orders, you can then group them together and dish out the order to any model in your army. Those that have irregular orders cannot contribute to that order pool. Some special considerations regarding table sizes. In our tournament, we're going to be using a 4-foot by 4-foot table, and it really does impact exactly what you're taking because giving a 12-inch deployment zone, you're only left with 2 feet between where your army could be and the opposing army could be. And because of that, because you might have an opponent with a very high order count, they can get up into your army and cause a lot of havoc early game. Again, special considerations for table sizes, especially when you're looking at a 4x4, you want to find ways to deal with tag rushes. This is when your opponent brings a tag and you don't have something to necessarily counteract it, and it just kind of runs through, and basically every single one of the little cheerleaders that the tag has, these are units that are low in cost that just provide point orders for the tag to just really go in, rush across the table, and fire repeatedly, hosing you during turn 1. The other thing you want to avoid is link team rush. This is when your opponent has a sectorial force that has multiple units that are linked. It means with one order they can move all up to 3 through 5 models across the table. And again, conservation of orders as he basically brings his army to bear against yours. The other thing about a 4x4 board is that you really can't overextend. The board is so small that when you have sniper rifles and missile launchers and whatnot that are shooting with bonuses up to 48 inches, a 4x4 table doesn't really give you much, or your opponent much concern about overextending their forces. In a more traditional Infinity board, which is 6 feet by 4 feet, where the distance between the two deployment zone is 4 feet, a lot of these considerations actually go away because sure, you could still have a tag rush across the field to try to get into your deployment zone, but by the time the tag gets there or the link team gets across, they do not have the overabundance of orders left, especially at a 200-point army. So let's take a look at a sample Capu Calci list. Now, for those of you guys who are not familiar with Infinity, Capu Calci is a sectorial army for the Hawk Islam. This list takes 7 Ghoulems, one with a missile launcher, one with a Panzerfaust, a Doctor and Lieutenant, 2 Jambazans, one with a heavy machine gun, one with a sniper, and a Bashi Bazooks. And let's compare and contrast it against that list of nice-to-haves. While we don't have an engineer, we don't have any units that really require an engineer. Some of the weapons might if they're hit by an EMP, but this army is not really an engineer-needing army, but it does have a doctor. It has camo units, sort of kind of with the Bashi Bazooks, who has a hollow field and provides some confusion to your opponent. You have 2 Jambazans each with multi-spectral visors. You've hidden your lieutenant. It's one of 7. You could effectively put it in a linked team as long as you don't use your lieutenant order, which you're not going to want to necessarily anyways. Or you could hide it in the back. This gives you a lot of flexibility. It gives you some high damage units with the missile launcher, the Panzerfaust, sniper rifle, and the heavy machine gun. You don't have a hacker in this list, but you don't really need it again because you don't have any units that can be hacked. They don't have units that disrupt deployment, but again, you have tons of regular orders. So overall, we're looking at a list that is actually fits well with what we've explained, that these are nice to haves in this list, and this all fits in a 200-point list with 4 special weapon costs. I've made this comment before that Infinity is not a game that you necessarily have to pick and choose individual units in order to have an effective army list, but you do have to know how to use them. And what's really nice is that even with 200 points, if you look at your nice to haves, if you just randomly selected out 200 points worth of models, there's a good chance that you might be able to tick off 4 or 5 nice to haves and be competitive in this tournament. It's also important to know your tournament format. For the tournament that we're running at Sci-Fi Genre, which is February 26th, we'll be using the Mission Roulette system. The link is here in the description. It's an excellent format for a tournament. It actually provides a mechanism so that a lot of the missions are objective-based, and depending on whether or not you require your players to randomly select or to hand-select which missions they're going to be accepting, it really does provide a lot of ways in which, you know, even if you get tabled, you could win the tournament, which I kind of like. It kind of breaks it up. It makes it so that even if you do have someone who brings a crazy, heavy-duty, combat-oriented list, that you still can easily be in the running for the tournament. So I know this has been a really quick overview, but this is, again, just a quick way to look at when you're setting up a list for a tournament, things you might want to consider. That's it, guys. Hope you have a good one. Later.